You look at every animation studio, and they started with the short film.
The mythology of Pixar goes back to the 5 guys sitting in a hallway making Luxo Jr., making Red's Dream, making Tin Toy, and constantly challenging each other.
There was a kind of pioneer spirit, like we're out in the wilderness making our own roads, and there's really nobody to help.
We were 1% of Pixar's expenditures and 99% of its visibility.
When we showed our stuff, which now I look back and think of as kind of crude, but it blew people away at the time because it was so much in advance.
It's really fun to see all the films strung together because you can see the medium evolve right before your eyes.
The development of our talents, the development of our technology leading up to the first feature film.
Trying to make a feature film in the 70s and 80s was completely nuts because the computers at the time were way too slow.
Back when we were working on our very first films, it was a challenge to make even a single image in computer graphics.
Compute power was still a huge limitation. Rendering any kind of computer graphics was just incredibly expensive.
We had a VEX 780, which is 1 million instructions per second, which is less than 1% of what you'd find in a modern PDA. The computer in a cell phone is 100 times faster than the one that we had at Lucasfilm.
So doing anything was just an incredible pain.
In those days, computer animation, computer graphics was in the domain of guys in white lab coats.
All of the images in the animation were being created by the same people who wrote the software.
Like going to a museum where all the paintings were done by the people who designed canvases and brushes.
The pictures were very simple, cartoony, kind of even primitive video game shapes.
Most of the motions had to be plotted out on graph paper, and people counted the little squares and typed in a number into the computer and said, go here, go here, go here, go here. And sometimes that looks good, and sometimes it looks kind of robot-like.
Our long-term goal was to make an animated film. In fact, everybody in the industry knew this group was dedicated to doing that.
And we knew that in order to get there, we had to have software that was robust and powerful and scaled properly. And
so let's work on the technology and on the software, and the speed will come. When we made our first short, we based it on an idea that Allie Ray Smith came up with. And it was at that time that we went out and hired John Lasseter to come in as the animator for it.
It seems funny to say it, but officially I directed him in his first animation at Lucasfilm. It was a piece called Andre and Wally B.
Ed Catmull and Alvy Ray Smith asked me to think about what a character would look like made up of simple geometric shapes. Spheres, cones, cylinders, boxes, that kind of thing. But I started looking at how simple Ub Iwerks drew those early Mickey Mouse cartoons. And so I started drawing what became Andre as this character made of simple shapes.
Up until then, most of us nerdy types didn't know how to do soft characters, nor was the technology really capable of doing rubbery, moldable characters like a good animator needs.
I remember going to Ed and saying, boy, I would love to have something I could bend, because the body is where a cartoon character gets so much of his expression. And so he thought, in classic Ed Catmull style, let me think about this. And he went away. And he came back, and he had invented the teardrop. The bottom was a hemisphere, the top was a hemisphere. And then the computer filled in this kind of section in the middle, and it bent. And I got so inspired by this that I got the idea for the second character, which was this big bumblebee with these big jelly bean-like water balloon feet.
Basically what happened in Andre and Wally B was the team of Bill Reeves and John Lasseter got established.
Actually, the part I worked on Andre and Wally the most was the backgrounds, was the set, the trees.
Bill Reeves had delivered something called particle systems, an ability to create and control millions of individual particles to build up larger objects.
So you could make it look like there were millions of leaves out there on a hillside full of trees. It gave this richness that I wasn't used to.
It was beautiful. It was like a painting. It was like pointillism. I was working on this for a few months in the springtime of 1984. The big deadline was this computer graphics convention called SIGGRAPH.
SIGGRAPH was a very important show at the time where a lot of the industry got together.
And you would show up once a year and show off what you had done that year to all of your colleagues.
They had courses, they had panels, and they had the evening film show. And this was like a Geek Fest rock and roll concert or something, because it was always in a big arena.
It was a conference where everybody went, wow, a lot. Because every year things were new.
I remember Jim Blinn always coming every year. He was working at Jet Propulsion Lab, and he would come with planetary stuff of some form or another.
And some of the companies started off by making logos, because you could have them spin around and put sparkles and do various things to have interesting logos.
Most of it was just technology demonstrations.
You know, crystal balls over a checkerboard, and everybody went crazy. I'm sitting here going, what am I missing here? But everyone recognized the technical advances that they were seeing.
If it was a breakthrough moment, the house would come down with cheering and applause.
There's no story, there's no characters, there's nothing to engage with at all, but we know how hard that was.
And one of the techniques we wanted to show off in Andre and Wally B, well, there's two. We wanted this animation done by a real animator to be showcased. We had the particle systems by Bill Reeves we wanted to showcase, and we had motion blur. This was one of the most revolutionary things that Pixar came up with. You actually blur characters out in the direction of motion during a frame. It made the difference between being commercially successful and not. We showed up with it, and the house went absolutely nuts.
The fact that I was animating, just using my knowledge of animation principles, it had this snappy quality.
And both visually and story-wise was a step above anything people had seen before.
And I remember this guy, he came up to me and he said, John, what software did you use to animate Andre and Wally B? I said, it was just, you know, a keyframe animation system, pretty much like other systems I've seen. He goes, no, it was so funny. What software did you use?
Andre and Wally B was proof that, yes, you could use this medium to tell a story. It wasn't much of a story, but you know, there it was. It worked.
But we didn't finish it in time for SIGGRAPH. So it was partly rendered, and then part of it was in wireframe. What I found was that most people didn't notice that we hadn't finished the film. They were so caught up in the characters that they didn't notice that it switched to wireframe.
When I first came to Lucasfilm to work with a computer graphics group, I thought I was going to need to learn how to program to be able to animate.
There were no off-the-shelf software packages. There were no easy-to-use techniques.
I realized, you know what? I'm never going to know what Eben Osby or Bill Reeves or Ed Catmull knows because they're PhDs. They've invented this stuff. Then I thought, well, wait a minute. They can't bring something to life through pure movement and give it personality like I can. So you know what? I'm just going to sit right next to them and work in collaboration.
It was actually a really great environment because, you know, we could just yell across the room at each other when we had a problem or question.
John and Bill and Eben were constantly pushing each other to do better.
I would always come up with an idea and show it to them. Can we do this? And I don't know if we can. Let me think about it. And they go off and they start working on it, doing a little R&D, and I'd look over their shoulder and I'd see something. And they say, oh, that's a mistake. I said, that's amazing. You know, can you do that again? Oh, yeah. Because then you could do this. And I draw something else. And it's, how about this? Oh, and it's an idea I would have never thought of if I hadn't seen the technology.
It was this great back and forth. I always felt like the other half of John's ability to make films. We could do what he couldn't.
Art challenges technology, and technology inspires the art. You know, and that's it, in a nutshell, the way we work at Pixar.
The early years were hard years. We were selling hardware.
We've shown you just a few examples of the applications waiting to be explored with the Pixar image computer.
And then we sold software. In the background, we had a group that kept on making animated shorts.
It was something Ed Catmull really loved, but still, it was not our business.
I went to John and said, can we do an animated short that's a Pixar short?
Let's do something that really says who we are. Eben Osby and Bill Reeves were teaching me how to use the modeling system. And there was a Luxo lamp sitting there on my drawing table.
The model itself was the world's simplest hierarchy. It was a base, and then an arm, and then another arm, and then a head.
And I started animating it as though it was alive and thinking about, okay, if a Luxo lamp was alive, how would it move around?
You could see him connect with that and saying, oh, I see how this thing works.
And I know one thing I was working on was the shadowing algorithm.
Self-shadowing was the lamp turning around and casting shadows on itself.
And what would be a cooler way to show off this technology than having the moving light sources be these lamps moving around so the shadows changed position all the time?
Then the fateful day that Tom Porter came into the graphics room with Spencer, his son. His proportions were totally different than that of an adult. The head was so big, and lift up the arm, and I could barely reach the top of his head, and I started thinking, what would a baby lamp look like? And in the computer, I was able to scale different parts of the lamp differently. We didn't have the computer power to do camera moves. We didn't have the computer power to do background. So I was like, how about a wood grain on the floor? We have that, right? Yeah, okay. I can work with this.
John had a very clear idea of what the limitations of the medium were, and so he told a story that he could tell in that medium and not have to invent stuff that was impossible to invent at the time.
And we premiered it at SIGGRAPH.
As soon as the lamp moved, people started going crazy. And then the ball came in, and they were going nuts. And I remember actually shrinking down in my chair, getting a little frightened, thinking, what's going to happen when the funny part gets here?
It's only a minute and a half long. Before it was done, people were giving it a standing ovation.
Poor Gary Rydstrom, his wonderful sound work was never heard at that screening because the crowd was just literally screaming their heads off.
And people were just talking about it forever as the first time they'd seen it. And the it that they had seen was the first time they'd seen emotion and character and storytelling in a computer-animated film.
There's curiosity, there's dismay, there's sympathy, there's bemusement, a whole range of things that he was able to get through to the audience using just a few joint angles in this thing.
You realize that, okay, it's no longer a test if it's actually touching you in some way.
They laugh, they cry, they go out singing the songs.
And I'll never forget Jim Blinn, one of the giants in the computer graphics research world, came to me after the show. And he said, John, I have a question for you. And I thought, oh no, Jim Blinn, he's going to ask me about the self-shadowing algorithm. I know he is. I don't know that. He goes, John, was the parent lamp a mother or a father? And I just smiled, and I thought, we did it. We did it. You know, it's about the characters. Those early days at Pixar were really magical for me. I was the only animator. Ed Catmull and everybody said, okay, here's the new research we're doing. Let's figure out a story and make another film for SIGGRAPH.
6 months doing the short and then 6 months developing software and then just 6 months doing the next short.
Technically, what we were trying to do at the time was to lay the foundation for doing feature films.
And so Red's Dream, for instance, we wanted to show off this new rendering system that we had. We had the Pixar image computer, and we wrote a rendering system that ran on it.
Look, you can see it rendering right now in here.
This is actual speed. This isn't touched up video.
Oh, hey, cool.
Back in those days, everybody didn't have their own computer.
The animation station that we used, we had one of in the building, but it was a big deal. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars.
This is a picture system right here. And this is a Pixar, this is Java and Robbie's, this is CCR.
Me and Eben and Bill and Ed, we'd just kind of be sharing one computer, and I would always take the midnight shift, you know. Got most of my animation done from about 10:30 at night until 4 or 5 in the morning. And then I had a futon under my desk, and I would sleep there.
How come your car has the best parking spot?
Because it hasn't moved in about 3 days. I've been sleeping here.
In the car?
No, in my office.
Oh.
This is kind of interesting. This is how I tested out the animation of the tag. See?
Oh, that's great.
See, so you can see it. I got the movement of the tag.
Would you make movies of this, or would you just watch it?
No, I just would watch it. People walk in. We had visitors walk in once, and I was staring at this thing like this. And they kind of like, John, are you busy?
How long did it take you to animate the sequence we just saw?
That was about 5 days. That was a little long.
5 days? How many hours a day were you working?
Oh, just a couple.
Bill Reeves and Eben Osby and I, we wanted to do these night shots in the rain, in a city, these kind of neat, gritty shots, something that no one's ever seen before.
Red's Dream was the first film where we were trying to emulate a particular look, moody, dark.
And I very much wanted to do something with kind of a sad ending. having more of a pathos. And I always say, oh, that was Pixar's blue period. Red Stream is very popular in Europe.
Tin Toy was probably the hardest of the shorts.
It was this great little idea that I had gotten from looking at videotape of my nephew playing with his toys. Everything he picked up went into his mouth, and he slobbered on it. I thought, imagine what it must be like to be a toy in the hands of a baby. That baby is like a monster. It was a challenge. It was twice as long as Red Stream, had twice as many shots. It was using Mimvy, or Marionette, our animation system, for the first time. It was using RenderMan for the first time. And it had our first human character, the baby, in it.
It was a much more organic kind of character. Skin, facial animation, even though when you look at it today, you sort of go, ooh, that's a weird looking baby. I had to write a whole system to do the modeling.
What now seems amazingly primitive at the time was the limit of what we had figured out how to do with the computer. So we were doing things like soft shadows and the textures of wood flooring and cloth on the couch and a magazine on the couch.
So everybody who could model anything had to pitch in to make a toy to go under the couch. I made the little airplane.
I built the fire hydrant.
I modeled a robot who's hiding under the couch.
And Ed Catmull said, well, I'll make something for you. How about an elephant? Great, Ed, we'd love an elephant. So he went off and decided, well, to do an elephant, first I need to implement Bezier patches in our modeling language. So he did that. And then he sketched an elephant on a piece of graph paper. And then he sat down with a text editor and manually entered the coordinates for every point on the elephant. And out came a perfect elephant. And that is the most math geeky thing we had ever seen.
It was the first 3D computer animation ever to win an Academy Award. But the most important thing that Tin Toy did was plant in our heads the idea of toys being alive. And out of that grew Toy Story.
By the time we did Knick Knack, we might have had 10 or 12 people.
In 1989, we all agreed, let's back off a little bit. Let's make a film that's fun and not very demanding.
Consolidating our gains and making a film with the techniques we knew how to make.
And John said, this time I want to make a real, Chuck Jonesy sort of cartoon.
It was the first film where we worked on the story as a team.
When they were having discussions about the story of Knick Knack, what it might be, or what would go on with it, we were all part of it.
I remember the story conference where the ending came up, all right, he falls off and he ends up in a fish tank. And it was Deirdre Warren who said, and there'll be a mermaid there, right? And
John said, yes, let's do it, or that's right. And I think that's a great indication of the collaborative spirit.
Knick Knack, it was, again, all hands on deck.
Everybody worked on a little bit of everything. We had people designing their own characters. John didn't do every bit of the animation as he had done on previous films, but he let us do, our personal characters. Mine was the flamingo.
In Knick Knack, I believe I modeled the igloo.
I animated the dance cycle of the pyramid. That was my giant contribution to the animation there.
We went through 2 or 3 very dark days during those times where you didn't know whether we were going to make it as a company.
All these hardware guys are complaining that we just spend money. We don't ever make money for the companies because our short films never made money.
In fact, from a business point of view, this company selling hardware had no business at all doing animation.
And I thought, well, come on, when's the shoe going to drop? When are they going to just stop the animation? And the guy who's the head of software goes, they never will, John. The world knows us from these little short films.
Each frame was computed in 8 to 10 minutes on the Pixar image computer.
Pixar image computer also, although people in the oil exploration business and medical imaging were buying them, they liked the fact that short films were being made on them. It added a little bit of glamour to the quality of the product.
But ultimately, we knew that the image processing market was doomed, which is why we got out of it.
And the animation business was actually doing sort of okay. And Steve felt that it was time to reorganize the company and to make some big changes. And so we went from about 80 people to 50 people in the course of a week.
I can remember the meeting in the lunchroom when they handed out the Pixar Animation Studios t-shirts. That was such a huge turnout. I cried because, you know, we had gone from literally working in a hallway to owning the dump.
The goal from the time that I first started working with Ed in 1978 through Lucasfilm and through the formation of Pixar was we all wanted to make a feature-length film. And so it was time to stop making short films in a sense. And so here's what we'll do. We're gonna get into the TV commercial business, gain more production experience, and then do something like a half-hour TV special, and from that launching pad, go on to making a feature-length film.
And right around that time is when Peter Schneider tried for the third time to hire John away from us. So John turned down being a director at Disney to stay with a struggling startup and told Peter he should consider doing it with Pixar. So Peter Schneider called me and said, we'd like you to do a feature film. So I said, we think that we should do a half-hour TV special first. And he said, if you can do a half hour, you can do 90 minutes. I said, okay, I'll buy that.
Hello? Oh, yeah! Ah! Whoa! Hey, whoa! Did I frighten you?
While we made Toy Story, we stopped making shorts at that time. But as we got near the end of it, we realized that was one of the things that helped make us who we were.
Ed and I said, you know what, we should continue doing short films. Because for what it did for me as an artist, as a director, I want to make sure and we give that opportunity to other people in the studio.
We just realized, you know, we should always be doing this. We should always figure out a reason to do the shorts.
Yeah, this young person may have a talent here. Let's give them a chance to direct something. Here's these young animators. Let's give them a chance to be a supervising animator, or let an artist become a production designer. So from Jerry's Game on, the short films were helping to develop our talent, was helping continue the research and development at the studio. You want to be able to have an opportunity to experiment with things without committing to it for a full feature film.
But we do think that people enjoy them, and that's enough reason. If people go to our films and they have a great time, then we will have succeeded. And the shorts are part of that enjoyment.
The gem of an idea that that little animation group represented, that's really the core of what Pixar turned out to be.
That core group, a lot of us are still here.
It could have fallen apart. There were other people who had the same goal at the time, and they didn't get there. I mean, these are strong, good people, but there wasn't the right combination. We were unique in that we had the support of Steve Jobs.
It's difficult to separate luck and talent when you have a fine result like this, but we had a pretty good mix of the both.